They're coming in now. I see it. We're going to give you a minute to come in. Make sure you've got your video. Welcome, everyone. Bonjour. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the North American Expat Quarterly Financial Forum. This is the last one of this year, and I'm very pleased to introduce our panel, which includes Brian Dunhill with Dunhill Financial and Mary Louise Sarado, who is the Executive Director of the ACA, American Citizens Abroad. And we have an exciting 1 hour for you because we're going to be talking about all sorts of expat issues. I'm going to let Brian and I are actually going to open this up with some general things that we know you want to hear about. And then we're going to let Mary Louise have the floor to talk about some very important expat issues. So, Brian, maybe I should start. Maybe
Adrian,
would you like to say hello?
Wonderful to see you and wonderful seeing everybody. Always great to see you, Adrian, and a lively and a big bunch hopefully today because we have a lot of fun things to talk about and the right people to talk to in Mary Louise. But I'm actually going to start up and hog the show a little bit, if you don't mind, Adrian.
I'd love for you to.
a few little announcements. First of all, we'll announce our new security feature here at in Nala. So you guys can all stop by and say hello to her. Well, I think I just interrupted her from mid-nap. I think she wants to go back to her bone. So a new fun person to hang around with here in the office. But we actually have a announcement that's really exciting for everybody that's in France or moving to France, in that we are finally launching DF Direct. DF Direct is a new offering that we're going to give at Dunhill Financial that is built as a robo-advisor. Now, robo-advisor sounds kind of futuristic and might be just an acronym that you don't know, or well, not an acronym, but a term that you don't know. What that means is it's an accessible investment tool for everybody to be able to access investment portfolios and keep their broker-dealer in the United States. It's backed by Apex, which is the same company that Betterment goes through, Robinhood, Goldman Sachs, Marcus, and the likes. So your money is a nice, solid institution, and we'll be able to launch for any French address come December 1st with a $0 minimum and a low annual fee basis.
What does that mean, a $0 minimum?
So basically, that means that anybody can come in. So essentially, you'll be able to sign up directly on the platform. And even if you're saving as little as $50 a month or whatever it might be, you're able to set up your account right there, your investment accounts, whether it be your IRAs back in the States or whether it just be a general investment account. It's the perfect way to either get started or to take care of those old IRAs or those old investment accounts in the States without having to hire a full-fledged financial advisor. So nice new tool, launching on December 1st. The website is already up and running for anybody that has a US address, but it will be up and live on December 1st. Drop us an email if you want more information. We'll be doing plenty of webinars just on that subject. But today's not on that topic. Today, the big topic is essentially taxes, how tax issues can change, how legislative issues are changing in the United States for American expats, and mostly how they deal with issues right there in France. So I'm going to launch right in. I want to talk to you a little bit about this, Adrian, if you don't mind, and let's basically start with one of the fallacies out there.
Let me ask you this question, Brian.
Absolutely.
The question that we get all the time is, does it make sense to spend less than 6 months, 183 days, in France just in order to avoid French taxation? What do you think about that?
Well, that is a wonderful question. And I think we'll break it down into two different groupings. One group being those people that are going to retire. Those of you that are lucky enough to retire over in France, if all your investments are back in the States, if you have US government Social Security and any other pensions in the US, you'll only be taxable in the United States if you move to France. So spending less than 6 months a year in France is just limiting your enjoyment of France. You can stay as long as you want and your taxation will be the same. So all those retirees, basically, don't let it limit yourself. Get over there as much as you want to.
So you're talking about even dividends on your liquid assets?
Absolutely. All those investments, dividends, capital gains will only be taxable in the United States. And that's why we want to keep the investments in the United States. We start moving them into French vehicles, and all of a sudden we can subject ourselves to French tax, which naturally is going to be higher than that American tax.
Okay, so that's pretty cool. Okay, but now what do you think is the best way to avoid, US state income tax as well as the French taxes?
That is a wonderful question, because a lot of us get stuck in one of those 43 states that has state income tax. California, New York, some of the worst, some of the highest. If all of a sudden you want to make sure that you never get a state income tax bill when you move over to France, the safest means is to take a step through one of those 7 states that doesn't have a state income tax. So in other words, instead of moving directly from California over to France and having a friend receive all of your statements, which means a 1099 is being sent to the state of California, they're going to assume that you're still resident there and taxable there. Get yourself an address in Nevada, Florida, Texas, Washington State, any of the states that don't have a state income tax. Make sure the 1099s go there or go directly to France, which some of the brokerage firms will allow you to do. And then you'll make sure that you're not getting hit with that state income tax. In that situation, in those 43 states, because you're avoiding the state income tax, you're only paying US federal tax, it's cheaper for you to retire in France than it would be in those 43 states.
Okay, so you're saying, that before you actually make the move to France, if you set up a residency with a friend or a relative or something like that that lives in any one of the non-taxable states, then you can actually totally avoid the state tax just by doing that.
Exactly. If you move yourself out of the residency of that state, all of a sudden you're going to not throw off any red flags to that state income tax. A PO box can even work to receive all that mail,
really,
and everything else. So it's just one of those nice guarantees to make sure that a state doesn't come after you once you no longer live in that state.
Oh, well, then I think I need to change my state of residence myself, because Louisiana is definitely a taxable state.
They are a taxable state, but there's reasons behind that sometimes. So we'll talk about that offline. That being said, one of the biggest benefits of moving out of the United States is the medical system in different countries.
Oh, I can attest to that.
What do you think of the medical system over in France, Adrian?
Oh my God, I can't say enough wonderful things about it. I mean, first of all, when you retire to France after you've gotten your visa, after 90 days of being here, you can apply for PUMA, P-U-M-A, which is the French healthcare system. And believe it or not, even though you've never paid into it, the French believe that it is a right to have medical care. So when they give you a visa, they automatically will give you, medical care, paying up to 70% of your costs, which is amazing. Then you can always top it up with a mutuelle insurance policy. So a mutuelle, which is, a top up. So for instance, I have a policy that pays 100% with no deductible, believe it or not, for about 1,500 euros a year. And that's at my age. So it's pretty amazing. My medical costs are virtually nil. Even if you had to pay out of pocket, it's still about 1/10 of the cost that it is in the US across the board for drugs and for procedures. It really is, it'll blow anybody's mind, especially after you've had, healthcare in the US. The thing is too, that you actually get better care, because the system in France is not based on profit like it is in the United States. So therefore, the interest is in keeping you healthy, not making you sick so that you can, so that the doctors and the hospitals can make more money. I mean, I'm a bit cynical about it, but I've had really good experience here. There's also a system called SOS Médecin, which means you can make a phone call and within an hour, a doctor comes to your door who can then, advise, prescribe, call an ambulance, whatever. And so it's really remarkable, all in all. So I know that there are an awful lot of expats who they're afraid of moving over here because they're afraid of losing their doctors. And they have it in their minds that the US is the best, most perfect medical system in the world. And I'm sorry, but that's not really true. It's here that it's amazing.
It's certainly the most expensive in the United States.
Well, that is for sure. I have to take out a policy when I travel to the United States, because even though my French policy will cover me when traveling, it only covers French scheduled costs, which means that I would be screwed if I had some problem in the States without a special policy.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, some of you might decide to actually keep up your Medicare payments while you're in France, just in case you want to move back to the States. This is a question.
Going to do that, Brian?
Some people decide to, just in case they need to go back to the United States, but it's not a necessity. Mm-hmm. Because, for instance, if the average person pays, say, $100 to $150 for their Medicare coverage per month. Now, if you don't pay into it, all you have to do is pay back what you should have paid with a little bit of interest.
So that's great.
So all of a sudden, if you're not good with monthly payments, then it's probably better just to go ahead and pay it monthly for the insurance. But if you have the means to pay for it and you decide to come back 10 years in, okay, you'll owe, $20,000, $30,000 to get back into the system, but it will be a lot cheaper than trying to cover yourself fully without Medicare coverage. So
well, that's a really good point. Right.
Don't think you lose it.
Well, now, okay, let's say I'm on Social Security, which I will be soon. What's the best way for me to get my Social Security payments in France?
Absolutely. Yeah. The US Social Security system, it's funny how taking money out of the US system is always a little bit easier than putting it in. So a lot easier than dealing with the IRS. The Social Security Administration will actually send your monthly payments directly to your French bank account if you ask them to. They'll convert it into euros. And even though we're always talking about the best ways to get money from the US to Europe in the cheapest way, when the government does it, they're able to do it at the Fed window. The Fed window being there's zero cost to it. So if you're living in France and you just want it sent directly to your bank account right there in France, you just have to get a hold of the embassy in Paris. They'll give you a quick, easy document to sign, send over. Instead of sending it in dollars to your US bank account, they'll send it in euros to your French bank account.
That's very cool. And they don't charge, there's no difference in the spread between the buy and the sell rate, or it's really minimum?
Exactly. It says there's zero spread and there's zero wire fee. So there's no international wire fee on there, which is a wonderful place to be.
Wow. Okay. That's cool.
We touched on this a little bit, but why don't we dig a little bit deeper on why we should maintain a US address if we're moving to France?
Oh, very important. Actually, I have way too many clients that they couldn't wait to leave the US. And so they closed everything down and then they were sorry later. Because, if you have US credit cards, for example, you pretty much have to maintain your bank accounts and you have to maintain some sort of an address. Let's say you get relief fund checks. Where are they going if you don't have some sort of a bank account to facilitate things? No, I think it's very important to at least maintain at least one bank account. I know a banker who said, never close any bank account. You never know when you're going to need it. And I fully agree with that. And so, it's pretty easy to do to maintain it. And when you maintain a US address as well, whether it's with a friend or a relative, you're going to love this little tip. Believe it or not, okay, when you get mail to that other address, whoever's there, if all they do is stick a label on the envelope or write on the envelope, forward to, put the new French address on it, dump it back in the mailbox without any extra postage, the US postal system will actually forward the mail to France at no additional charge. And I know this to be a fact because I've been doing it for 27 years. So it's very easy.
Brilliant. Well, that gives us an opportunity to actually introduce our guest speaker today. Mary Lou Sarado, she directs and manages American Citizens Abroad. If you don't know this organization, make sure to Google it, go to their website. It's full of great resources. She's been involved with the organization since 2002. And this makes her the key liaison for us as American expats to not only the congressional offices, the IRS, the Treasury, the Joint Committee of Taxation, Senate Finance Committee, the House and Ways Committee. She develops all these relationships for us as American expats to liaise our concerns and our main concerns that go about. So this is your form. I see tons of questions coming through the chat. Please keep them coming just because we're not answering them right now. Thank you, Patty. There's the link right there so that you can scour through the website. Just because we're not answering them right now, we're going to have a long Q&A at the end, but I want to take this chance to introduce Mary Louise and to ask a little bit more about even the relationship with the State Department Federal Credit Union before we get into ACA.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Adrian. Thanks for inviting American Citizens Abroad, ACA, to be here today to present, answer some of your questions, and update you on what we're doing. I can only echo what Adrian and Brian are saying about keeping a U.S. banking address presence in the U.S. when you go overseas. It's really important, even for your credit rating. You never know what's going to happen in life. You never know whether you might at some point in time want to return, buy property, or you have children or family that are back in the United States. And if you close everything up and you no longer have those relationships, it's really hard to keep your credit rating going. And it's really hard, even if you were to come back and want to get a mortgage, let's say, to buy, maybe it's going to be a summer house in the US, you're going to live in France and going to keep a pied-à-terre in the United States. So it's really important if you have an account and financial relationships in the United States to keep them open. If you don't, ACA has a solution for you through our membership. We have a relationship with the State Department Federal Credit Union, SDFCU. And this is a credit union that has been servicing the State Department, but it is not part of the US government. It's not part of the State Department. If you know anything about credit unions, it's owned by their members. So we are a qualified organization, what that means is that if you apply for a bank account with SDFCU, you already, the door is open to you because you're coming through ACA. They recognize us as a qualified organization. This has been a real lifesaver, not only for the stimulus checks, but for a lot of individuals who have had their IRAs and their 401ks either shut down in the United States or frozen. As you know, there is a bit of an issue with some of the major investment companies over in the US. If an American no longer has a US address, they have issues with maintaining them as a client. This has to do more with European legislation than US legislation. For one time, it's not us. So a lot of those individuals were able to transfer those investments over to the State Department Federal Credit Union. And that has been, again, like a real lifesaver. They also have other products and features. They're a full service bank. And it's really a great product. So little publicity for that. So Brian, do you want me to talk a little bit about ACA, the organization, the history? You have a specific questions
Yeah,
for me?
let's start off with the background on ACA and the different groupings, what you do on a daily basis for us as American expats.
Great. So American Citizens Abroad has been around 40 plus years, and it was an outgrowth of the work on the Get the Vote from Abroad. So a lot of you down there in Paris are probably familiar with people and organizations that worked on this in Paris. And we had two of our founders who were also involved with that. And they were very involved with citizenship legislation, being able to pass their US citizenship onto their children who were born overseas because they themselves had not fulfilled certain residency requirements that at the time were required. And they were able to change that legislation to make it a lot easier for Americans overseas, children who were born overseas from American parents who they themselves were born overseas, to pass their citizenship on. And with the Get the Vote from Abroad, when that was passed, they recognized that it was going to be very difficult to get the messaging up to Congress because the vote is obviously spread across 435 districts in 50 states. So it's hard to get any one representative really interested in and motivated about an issue because unlike a lot of other countries, France, Italy, I know, have representatives actually sitting in their governments that are representing their expat community. And the United States doesn't have that. So ACA filled that void. And we did it for many years by doing door knockers up to Congress, annual door knockers, which is just an annual visit. It's a terminology that's used here up in Washington, D.C. And it's, coming a meet and greet and explaining our problems to representatives and offices. We found that prior to 2012, the 5 or 6 years prior, we were coming to Washington, D.C. 4, 5, 6 times a year. And that really to have an impact, you really had to be in Washington, D.C. And this in 2012 made us set down offices here in Washington, D.C. and give us a 24/7 presence. We have a team. There's not only myself here in Washington. I have Charles Bruce, who's our legal counsel. We have an associate legal counsel, Glenn Frost, and Jonathan Lakowitz, who joins us from Boston. And all these people bring an immense amount of tax and legislative experience. And that's the name of the game, is understanding the legislative process and how things can get passed in Congress, how regulations can be changed, and how legislation can be passed. A lot of times we hear out in the community, oh, it's easy. It shouldn't be like that. You should do it on fairness. Numbers don't matter. What are you guys talking about? And that is not the case. If you don't understand the process in Washington, D.C., the ACA is not about breaking down the process. We know the process. We know how it works. We need to work within that process. So the organization has long advocated on tax issues, but that's not the only issues that we deal with. We're also concerned with the Windfall Elimination provision, WEP. Many of you may be familiar with this, that you can have your US Social Security reduced if you are receiving pensions, foreign pensions. We deal still with citizenship issues, voting and representation. But obviously, as the US tax code has become ever more complex, taxation, and in particular with the advent of the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, FATCA, I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but it is essentially a reporting mechanism for foreign bank accounts. If you are an American that maintains foreign bank accounts quote unquote, outside of the United States, you need to be reporting those on a form 8938 with your tax return. And your foreign bank is also reporting them through to the IRS and to the US government. So as all that legislation has become ever more complicated, taxation has taken up a lot of the oxygen in the room. And so a lot of my time and a lot of ACA's time is spent on pushing for residence-based taxation, RBT. Residence-based taxation is the concept of taxing individuals based on where the income is earned. Currently, the United States operates on a system of citizenship-based taxation, or CBT. And that means you're taxed because you're carrying a little blue passport, and they don't care where the money is earned. It's subject to US taxation. Residence-based taxation, or RBT, would flip that so that income that is earned in the United States in relation to economic activity in the United States. You live in France, but you maintain rental property or investments in the United States. That's fully taxable by the US government. But your income that you earn in France that is not associated to any economic activity in the United States, that is no longer subject to US taxation. So that is my day job. We have, as Brian mentioned, we have longstanding relationships with the key committees: Joint Committee of Taxation, Senate Finance Committee, House Ways and Means. Why are these committees important? It's great to have congressmen and representatives who are interested in your issue, but the minds and hearts that you really have to convince are the people who are actually going to be tasked with the job of estimating the cost, writing the legislation for something like residence-based taxation, or for even a regulatory change, something like same country exemption, which we are proposing for FATCA reporting, which would take out of the reporting system any bank account that an American legitimately living in France, that bank account is your local account. It's not offshore for you. It would take out of that reporting system for the American and the bank. It's not a replacement for tax reform, but it is a regulatory fix that, quite frankly, the Treasury could very easily put into practice and at least give some temporary alleviate some temporary problems until such time as we get to residence-based taxation. So currently on residence-based taxation is probably giving you a lot of information, but trying to cover the whole ground. We are advocating up to all those offices. We had, as early as March of this year, a meeting with the US Treasury on residence-based taxation. And at that meeting and at previous meetings last year, we have been presenting a piece of research that we did in 2017 with a group here in Washington, D.C. called District Economics Group. District Economics Group is an independent consultancy, and they do all of the scoring for US legislation. And what that means is every piece of legislation comes to Congress with a number. They want to know, if we pass this piece of legislation, how much will it cost? How much will it save? Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Residency-based taxation needs to be revenue neutral or needs to have a zero cost. You don't want to go out and ask anybody to support this legislation with a cost attached to it. So what we did, ACA, is we took the current tax code, and next to it, we said, where do you carve into the current tax code to get to residence-based taxation? It's not a piece of legislation. It's just a roadmap for anybody who wants to write legislation. They can look at that and say, okay, we're going to take this element. We're going to do A, B, and C. We're not going to do D, because that might cost too much. We said, if someone did write legislation to this, how much would it cost? And we hired District Economics Group, and they ran numbers and they got it to revenue neutrality. The surprising thing about this research, which we are currently updating, and it should be available in another week or two, and we already have all the congressional offices knocking on our doors saying, please come in and show us this, is surprisingly, nobody in Congress really knows how much is being generated through the current tax system from Americans overseas. The IRS has some information, but as many of you know, the only real surefire filing that tells you an American is outside of the country is someone using the foreign earned income exclusion, because you have to be outside of the country to qualify a certain amount of days to qualify for that exemption. Many people use foreign tax credits. Many people domestically use foreign tax credits. Many people file with a foreign address. Many people file with their tax preparer's address in the United States or with a US address. So the IRS is missing a piece of the information, and we have another piece of the information. So a lot of times you hear people saying, well, I gathered up all this information the IRS published, and I, put this together, and I think the number is this. Can't rely on that because it's not a complete picture. So we are in the process of updating that research. The last time we presented our research to Joint Committee of Taxation, we had the chairman of that committee, and they gave us 2 hours. And I can tell you that committee does not sit down for 2 hours and talk to ACA or District Economics Group just because they have nothing better to do. So there is a real interest and desire for this information, and we hope it's going in the right direction, and that direction is tax reform. And we do feel that it is going in that direction.
I have an important question for you, Mary Louise. We've already established that the double taxation treaty between the United States and France is very accretive and very helpful for retirees that go to France. Would residency-based taxation change any of this for any of these retirees over in France?
So the first thing to keep in mind is we don't have a piece of legislation written. So it's hard to know without legislation how everything is going to hang together and how all the pieces are going to come together. The other thing is tax treaties, as you know, Brian, are generally not written to the benefit of the American citizen. It's generally written to the benefit of the foreign national. The idea would be that residence-based taxation would, quote unquote, override that. You would have all the benefits. You would no longer need the treaty. As it is, the United States can always use the savings clause, which overrides those treaties anyway. So it's a little in anticipation, but we would envision that RBT would correct all those problems, and that there wouldn't really be a need for the tax treaty for the American. However, those treaties would still be there. And if someone didn't want to opt into residence-based taxation, obviously the treaties would still be there for them.
Well, I mean, then you wouldn't even need the tax exclusion. I mean, it's costing the IRS money now just to offer the tax exclusion, correct?
The foreign earned income exclusion, you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, RBT that you wouldn't. RBT would be if it's foreign earned income, it's not subject to US taxation.
Well, what I'm saying though is that they're excluding it anyway. So
if you're
right.
using the
and then there are the many thousands and thousands of accidental Americans who the IRS would no longer have to worry about. It would reduce their workload, if nothing else.
From the sounds of it, Adrian, you're pitching this, which means that we should probably talk a little bit about the Rbt Coalition, Mary Louise.
Sure, happy to. So one thing to keep in mind, the Rbt Coalition, Residence-Based Taxation Coalition, that's not ACA. I'm happy to talk about it because we are one of the members, and so is Adrian, and so is Brian. It is a coalition that came together simply to support the concept of residence-based taxation. And the reason for this is a very sort of DC-centric kind of reason. A lot of times you will see an organization put out a letter about a certain piece of legislation or support some regulation, and they will say, all these other great groups are co-signing and believe in it. And the Rbt Coalition sort of is that concept, is that it gives support to the concept of RBT to all the individual groups like ACA and others who are in Washington, DC advocating. And it points to Congress. It says, this is just not ACA who's concerned about it. It just isn't a advocacy organization that is concerned about this taxation and wants residence-based taxation, but we have people in business, AmChams, people like Adrian that are doing relocation. This is a broad-based issue. It shows that it's not a niche issue, it's a broad-based issue, and it has wide support. So it helps to show Congress that it's not a niche issue, it's not just one organization, and that there are a lot of voices behind it supporting a move for tax reform for Americans overseas. So if you know an organization that's interested in joining the RBT Coalition, have them go over to the RBT Coalition website. Again, it's not an ACA organization. It's an independent. It has an administrator, and send them an email and send them your thoughts and let them know you'd like to join.
Brilliant.
I still can't get my head around the fact that the U.S. is one of 2 countries in the entire world that has citizenship-based taxation. It makes no sense whatsoever. But what do I know?
I can't answer that one for you.
We got to blame Lincoln, but now, Mary Louise, many of the people on this call aren't involved in an organization that they can get onto the RBT Coalition, but how could they potentially get involved with ACA? How can they get their voice heard?
So go to the ACA website, and I would say join ACA. We are completely funded by membership and donations, and we really are the only organization that is headquartered in Washington, D.C. We are nonpartisan, nonprofit. We're very unique in that sense. So your donations, your membership really helps our efforts here in Washington, D.C., fund our efforts, because we're primarily a volunteer organization outside of a small administrative staff. And consider volunteering for ACA. Do you have a skill? Do you have an interest in these topic areas? We're always looking for an extra set of hands and feet and a head. So definitely, if you're interested, send us an email, send us your CV. Take a look at the work that we're doing right now. Like I said, we fully funded our second research project, which was run out of ACA Global Foundation, because we're 2 separate organizations. We're ACA Inc., which is the advocacy organization, which is a 501c4, and then ACA Global Foundation, which is our research and educational branch, and that's a 501c3. And this is another important point for Washington, D.C. Being qualified as a 501c4 and a 501c3, that's really helpful in creating the relationship up on Capitol Hill, because they understand who they're working with. They can trust these people are a qualified organization. We know they're legit. And it also helps with stakeholders, with other organizations that are doing similar work on the tax front, on other issues like Families United, American Families United, that just joined the RBT Coalition. They're doing a lot of good work on citizenship issues, and organizations like the National Taxpayer Union that's working on tax reform. So it's really beneficial to have those 2 entities. But we fully funded the research project, and now we need to sell it up to Congress. We need to go back, like I said, and knock on doors. So donations into ACA to help on the advocacy front for that are really beneficial. So anybody who can donate. If not, just simply join ACA. You'll find out about all our activities. You'll get our newsletter. You'll get email blasts, and you'll be helping the cause.
Brilliant. Well, at this point in time, I think we can carry it over into the Q&A segment. Patty or Adrian, are you proctoring the Q&A, or would you like me to?
Well, there's lots of questions in the Q&A. Okay. One question was, how is it that it would be cheaper to live in France if the exchange rate is not favorable to US dollars?
First of all, Patty, I love the hat. Looking very French today. It's simple in that way. Just because the exchange rate is different doesn't mean that the value of your money is worth something different. If you look back in the playlists of past webinars that we've done, we had a long conversation about the history of the dollar to the euro, or the history of global currencies to the dollar. Right now, we have a strengthening in the dollar, mostly because we're looking at what is called tapering, i.e., we're no longer going to have the Federal Reserve buying all the bonds from the US government. That will most likely increase interest rates, which is attracting capital to the United States and increasing the value of the dollar. That means if you're getting a monthly Social Security payment in US dollars, converting it over to euros, it's stronger right now than it usually would be. One of the things that you want to actually think about is if you have your investment portfolios, that you safeguard it by naturally hedging, i.e. by buying more euros inside of the portfolio in non-US dollars to minimize some of these currency risks. We've done plenty of webinars on these, so please check out our YouTube channel. Otherwise, drop us a line. We'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you about it.
Okay, but Brian, okay, you can also invest in a property in France in euros, okay, that appreciates in euro value and hedges your bets against the rate of exchange. But everything in France is less expensive. I mean, look at property taxes. They're 1/10 of what they are in the US. Your medical costs are much lower. You know, you can live in a place in France where you don't need a car, so you can save on the cost of owning and operating a car. I mean, there's a million ways that you're going to save money, including a glass of wine, which is at least
as Patty drinks her glass of wine.
Yes, which is at least half the price that it is in the US. So while if you're so concerned with the rate of exchange, the truth is that just your lifestyle is going to be richer and cost you less in general anyway. So I just wanted to add that note to it.
Well said.
Patty, do you see any other questions that are particularly interesting to everyone? Are you on?
There, now I'm unmuted. There's a question from Orla. Are there any restrictions with buying property in France based on how long you've lived in France or immigration status?
Oh, we only caught the last little bit, Patty.
Are there restrictions with buying property in France based on how long you've lived in France or your immigration status?
No, and the answer to that is anyone can buy property in France. It has absolutely nothing to do with your immigration status whatsoever. No. Okay.
Let me look through. I'm put on the spot. I wasn't ready.
Well, I have a question here about French inheritance laws. Does a U.S. will take precedence? This is someone who says, my husband and I are concerned that if he dies first, his children will inherit, leaving me with depleted income. Inheritance laws, which of course have not that much to do with this seminar, webinar, I'm just going to give you an idea about that. As a U.S. citizen, you can elect U.S. law for bequeathing, for how you would bequeath your French property, but it doesn't change the taxation, which would be based on French law on French assets. But when a couple buys a property together, then basically when one spouse dies, the other spouse inherits the property 100% without any inheritance taxes paid. And then it can go to the children, and then they would be subject to the inheritance tax. But you can actually bequeath it to whomever you like based on US law if that's what you elect, and you do that in the form of a French will. It's not complicated at all.
I'll add to that for any of you that haven't made it to France just yet. Doesn't matter what your age is, this is the time to start thinking about gifting and estate taxes, because it's much easier to gift while you're in the US than it will be once you become resident in France. So have that conversation as uncomfortable as it might be before you get over to France, because it becomes that much more difficult once you get to France.
And I've got that problem, don't I, Brian? Working on it right now.
It's a good problem to have.
Okay. So one of the questions here too is, what about IRA distributions? Can it go straight to a French bank account?
It depends on the institution that you hold the account with. So essentially, a lot of institutions in the United States will only distribute the money to another US institution. Some of the institutions that have a currency mechanism in them will actually distribute it directly to your French bank account. And we can walk you through which institutions are easiest to work through in France. Our new setup with Apex that we're rolling out on December 1st will make that very easy to try to make distributions in and out of the account as seamless as possible.
Okay, great. Let's see, any other questions? Some people may want to even ask them live, right?
Absolutely.
They can hold up their hand. And we can see if there's anyone else who has a question. Sarah M.
I was going to ask Mary Louise really quick. I know you do a lot of different webinars and presentations. Are there any that would be of interest to the group, since we gave you a shortened time to speak today?
Absolutely. We have 3 that I would recommend. One that we did on May 25th that talks about our residence-based taxation and how it can be passed into legislation, because oftentimes we hear people saying it's just never going to happen. And, you know, I'm very frustrated. I've heard about this year upon year. And both of these webinars are on our website. If you go to our landing page, they're at the bottom. That one was on May 25th. Then we did a really, really very interesting webinar on July 7th. It's called Parting the Veil. We have District Economics Group, Mike Udell, the principal of the consultancy that's doing our research work for us. And he really walks through the importance of numbers. And I can't stress this enough, because there's a lot of chatter out there about numbers don't matter and we shouldn't think about it, and it's got to be done because it's the right thing to do and it's fairness and this. And that's just not the reality of Washington, D.C., and not the reality of how tax reform for Americans overseas is going to happen. Numbers do matter. And if you want to really delve into it and understand why the numbers matter, there is an ACA Taxcast. This is hosted on our Tax Preparer Directory website, which is a website of services for individuals who are looking for tax and investment providers. And occasionally we will do over there on the Taxcast, we will delve deep into these tax matters. And we speak with Marie Sapiri, who is an editor for Tax Analysts. And Tax Analysts is the Bible in Washington, D.C. for any legislator, anyone at the Treasury, anyone at the IRS who is looking, contemplating, reading about these issues. ACA has been widely included in articles in Tax Analysts. We've had some of our positions papers actually printed in there. And Marie Sapiri is an editor, and she is also a tax lawyer. And she talks about the reconciliation process, which I am not going to delve into right now. It is a process that is integral into passing legislation, in particular in a Congress such as ours right now. And that one as well will tell you and explain the importance of numbers and the importance of good numbers, and why this research work that ACA is doing is so very critical to helping push along RBT. And I can send you those links, Brian, and you can send them out to the attendees if they're interested. But definitely check those out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mary Louise.
I see that Carl Josh has his hand up if he would like to actually even unmute and ask his question.
Yes, Carl Jauch is my name, and
Wow,
I live in
excuse me.
France. I'm also a member of the board of ACA. I just want
Carl.
to point out that you were talking about inheritance taxes. It is true that you can apply the law of your own country when bequeathing property, but you have to watch out because the French inheritance tax applies very strongly for non-family members. In other words, if you give your property to a friend or a nephew, you pay maybe 65% of that value to the
Well, they pay it. You don't pay it. You're dead.
somebody.
So they pay it. I mean, let's. And yes, the inheritance taxes are very steep in France, but at the same time, property taxes are very low. So they just don't have it balanced in the same way.
And also the tax applies to all property, including money and real estate and stocks and everything.
That you own worldwide.
Yes. In addition to that, if you're living in France as a tax-paying resident, then you have to report all your foreign bank accounts.
Well, that's part of FATCA.
No, that's the French law.
Well, yes, they have to be
French
reported on both sides.
Yeah.
You have to report your U.S. accounts in France, and you have to report your French accounts in the U.S.
Absolutely.
And other accounts.
Yeah.
Right. But reporting it doesn't mean you're paying tax on them. You're just reporting.
No, but due to the fact that you have to report the accounts the day you die, they will know that you have accounts and that they want to know how much was in the account when you died.
Well, so Brian, you can talk to tax this planning, right?
Absolutely, and this is where, Carl, I'm a big fan of doing all of this planning prior to moving into France. And essentially, if we're already in France, then it's trying to use some of the gifting rules, which are not large amounts that we can gift away, and there is a cost to doing so, to benefit from those. But definitely taking money out of the family becomes very, very expensive, and therefore that early planning is so paramount in that process.
Let me make one comment about owning property. One of the ways to avoid the inheritance taxes is to actually transfer the title of the property into the names of your children or whoever you want to bequeath it to. So you will pay the 7 to 7.5% transfer taxes and fees to the notaire and to the state in order to do that. But if that's the way you want to save your heirs the money, it can be done, and it'll be a lot less expensive than the inheritance taxes themselves. So there are ways around it, and there's ways of structuring the purchase of the property in a way from the beginning that will save on the inheritance taxes. So it's all about planning.
Yeah, I confirm that. And I want to apologize. I came on late, and you may have been talking about this before at the beginning of the meeting, so I apologize if I went over something.
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay.
They're all good. They're all good questions.
Okay, fine.
I have another question here that says, does France have a credit score system like the US? And if so, would one need to establish credit in France? And would that help when buying a property in France? It's a question I can certainly answer, because no, there is no credit rating in France. And even the banks that review mortgages are not looking at US credit ratings at all. So, and there is no real credit in France. There's only a couple of credit cards, actually. I mean, you can certainly borrow money, and that would be the only thing, but you can borrow money to buy a car or to, buy a property or whatever. But there's the only credit cards I know of are Air France, I think, offers one, and I think the retail group that the BHV is part of. Otherwise, all the credit cards are actually debit cards.
We've got a question. What about assets that are already in a trust cited in the USA? Well, this is one of those interesting questions, because France is on civil law and the United States is on common law. Now, what that really means is that in France, they don't recognize trusts in any way, shape, or form. Now, this isn't a big deal in most situations. If you talk to a French lawyer, automatically they're going to say a trust is illegal in France. And that's just where they'll stop the conversation. Where I want you to think as Americans over there is how they'll act on a trust, which is that they'll look right through it as if it's your own. Now, most of you would have a revocable family trust, and therefore it's a pass-through on your Social Security on the US side anyways, and therefore on the French side, it would do the same, and therefore it actually doesn't change anything for them to look right through it, so it's not a problem. It's when you get into some more exotic irrevocable trusts or the such that the taxation might be different, or that you want to examine that, how it would behave in France. But for most of those revocable trusts, absolutely no problem. The French will just look right through it.
Okay. And I see a question with regard to mortgages. How much do the banks require? That is a loaded question. Thanks to FATCA, it is getting more and more and more difficult, not only to get a mortgage, but also to even open bank accounts. We are experiencing even new and tougher problems at the moment. The banks really only want to lend to people who are under the age of 60. They don't want to lend to self-employed persons. They want to lend only to people who are salaried because they don't want to take that kind of a risk. And believe it or not, it even depends on where the property is located as to how much loan to value they're willing to lend. We work with a mortgage broker named Kim Bingham, who is American/Canadian. She used to work with me as a search consultant, so she's very well versed. And we are obtaining mortgages, but it's been a very difficult process. And we have FATCA and the US regulations to thank for this. So, which is why we need to do everything we can to combat these issues, because I think that the US, and Mary Louise, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but it feels like we're being treated as traitors, not just as, Americans that happen to be living overseas for lots of different reasons. Or either that, or they just don't care about us. And so maybe you can speak to that a bit.
So I think what we find is that there definitely is a misperception of Americans overseas. The fact that we have been in DC now 8-9 years, knocking on doors on a regular basis, we've discovered several things. That in a lot of these offices, the tide is changing. A lot of the representatives themselves have lived overseas. A lot of the staffers in their offices have lived overseas, or come from dual national families where they have, some family members still living overseas. So I wouldn't portray Congress as looking at us as traitors. There is always that one-off office, but I think it's a lack of understanding of exactly what Americans are doing overseas and why they have gone overseas. Our research is really helping correct that problem, as is the research by other groups that are out there that are showing that most people overseas left for a semester abroad and decided to stay over. Stay overseas. They married a foreign national. They went over for a job assignment. It was supposed to last 2 years and lasted 25 years. People who are spending their time in both places, like myself, splitting their time. There's a huge community of individuals. So I think it's just a lack of understanding of the community. And I would say right now, there is definitely an interest in doing something. These offices that are coming back to us, like I said before, they're not coming back to us because they just happen to have some extra time during the day. And I think, I'm here over here at House Ways and Means. I think I'll give Mary Louise a call, see what she's having for lunch. There's definitely some interest on individual members, and that's showing that there's an understanding that this community is valuable as US citizens, that they're overseas for a variety of reasons, and that these very problems, Adrian, that you have cited with people having difficulties getting mortgages, getting lines of credit, there's a real understanding that that's a problem, and they need to have corrective measures. So it's not as bleak. I know it appears when
Feels
you're
very
overseas.
bleak at the moment. Okay, we are.
It appears very bleak, but actually, there's a lot deeper understanding of the community. We see that in key offices, and as you probably know, there is the Americans Abroad Caucus. That has been, I'm probably going to get the date wrong. I think it came into effect in 2007. Congresswoman Maloney out of New York is the Democratic co-chair, and we believe we have a Republican co-chair coming on board. I think there's going to be an announcement in the coming weeks or so. And they have come together on a lot of co-sign letters, and you've probably also seen outside of the caucus a lot of movement on the vaccine issue. This has given ACA a huge opportunity to open the door to offices, because a lot of offices have understood that issue. Didn't take much for them to be convinced. You've got tax-paying citizens overseas, and they cannot avail themselves to the vaccine distribution. So that's been widely supportive in a lot of offices, and again has opened the door to us. And one thing, Brian, I forgot to mention, where people can get to help out. We have write-in campaigns. We have 2 campaigns currently going on for calling for hearings at the House Ways and Means Committee, because we really believe that 40 plus years on, 6 to 9 million Americans overseas, we've never had our day in court. We've never had official congressional hearings, and the time has really come for that. So we have 2 write-in campaigns, one to the committee, and then one specifically to Chairman Neal, saying you have to make this a priority. And those campaigns really do have an effect. We have gotten call-ins to ACA from those campaigns saying, hey, I've had a constituent or 3 constituents write to me. I want to learn more about what the problems are. I want to learn more about what ACA is doing. So don't be fooled. Engaging in those campaigns and writing and contacting your congressman does have an effect. So they can go to our website, they can find go through our slider, find our write-in campaigns, because that really helps.
Great. Oh, thank you. By the way, we are now past the for us, 7 o'clock. For you, it's a little different, I imagine. So we've had our hour. Anyone want to just have a few last remarks before we sign off? Brian?
I'd love to say thank you, Mary Louise, not only for this evening, which is this day for you, of speaking to all of us, but also for all the advocacy. To think that only half a century ago we didn't have the right to vote, and that there's organizations like yours that are helping us get our voice out and make sure that it is heard. I hope everybody will go to ACA's, American Citizens Abroad's website. We've posted it up in the links, but we will follow up this event with not only the recording, some more information about ACA and the website details. But I hope you all will join. It is not an expensive organization to join, but as you can see, it makes a huge difference to all of us as American citizens abroad.
Well, and I'd like to thank you, Brian, for hosting the quarterly forums this year. And they've been absolutely fun and informative. So I appreciate that. And Mary Louise, thank you so much for joining us today. What you're presenting is absolutely, it's essential, really essential for an expat living, abroad. These issues are just very, very important. And we feel we don't have, we feel like we don't have a voice, but thanks to you, we do.
Well,
And-
thank you both of you, Adrian and Brian, for again inviting ACA and allowing us to have this opportunity to talk to this audience, and we really appreciate it.
Okay, and let me just say one last thing. For all of you whose questions didn't get answered, we will have a look at them. We'll try to get them answered to you after the session. And then look for the dunhillfinancial.com site where this will be posted, and you'll be able to rewatch it if you'd like to. So thanks to everyone. We're going to sign off now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much,
Thank you.
Adrian.
Bye,
Thanks, Patty. Thanks,
bonsoir.
Mary Louise. See you
Merci.
soon.